Thanks very much, Joe. Great presentation.
No, thank you, Adam. As I said earlier, I don't think we have enough a combined sports science and athlete conversation. So I think this is quite unique. If it's okay with you, I'd like to start on the positive side. I'd like to hear some of your positive experiences with technology and data collection as an athlete.
Yeah, well, like Dara introduced me, I studied biomedical engineering. And I guess through that, my main passion is human performance, which led me to output sports. And playing rugby professionally, I guess I'm always looking for that little 1% that's going to make me better. So I do like technology, especially when I can use it to, help me get better, tracking gym scores, GPS for speed, distance covered, I have my Apple Watch on as well. So I do like it. And yeah, I think it can be used to create that kind of competitive environment with yourself and with teammates to drive you on. And like I said, just give you that 1%. And it also allows me to kind of keep a kind of tab and a diary of when I'm playing well or performing well. I can keep a track of the metrics that are potentially going well for me and try to reproduce them. So yeah, I do like it as a whole.
And I know you recently, obviously you've gone through quite a lengthy rehab process. Thankfully that's done now and you've returned to play successfully. What were your experiences with the technology and the data collected through that specific process?
Yeah, well, a big one for me would have been, I would have used different technology at different stages, but even, for example, at the start, I tried to get as much sleep as I could. So tracking my sleep with my Apple Watch. And then as I was coming back, a lot was kind of getting my range of motion and my gym kind of scores back to where they were. And thankfully Output gave me a device because obviously, as we're aware, we're in a pandemic. Gyms were closed, so Leinster and all my teammates were working from home. So I was extremely lucky to have that device and be able to monitor what I could. Things like I had a plate removed from my ankle, so being able to check my knee to wall and being able to check my RSI, repeated jumps, comparing not just for double leg, but comparing my injured leg versus my uninjured leg. And then, yeah, I think as I got back then, things like, the GPS is a massive thing for return to play to make sure I'm hitting the numbers that I'm hitting in distance covered, accelerations, decelerations, max speed, all them things that I was used to hitting pre-injury in games and training. So yeah, I think I used different bits of technology at different times, but played a massive part in getting me back to playing and also giving me my confidence back that I'm back to where I am.
So I think that's great because that's also obviously how we, as practitioners, we put different emphasis on different pieces of technology or data throughout different contexts and processes. You're obviously very engaged in the data and you mentioned there about sort of tracking your progress. One of the things I wanted to ask you was about receiving feedback because I've always, believe strongly in involving the athletes in their data and giving back to them and the right that they have to feedback. But there's also the concern perhaps at times when the test didn't go so well. It hasn't shown progress. And I get nervous in those instances about my responsibilities and the effect it might have on sharing perhaps negative feedback with the athlete. Where do you sit on that? Would you still rather want to know, even if it's not a great outcome?
I think that's a great point. And I think the overall answer is it's probably very individualized. Some guys, I think that's where that probably goes a bit more than technology. It's probably more the relationship with each athlete. But I know, for example, on our team, some guys will really want to know. They'll track their sleep, say for example, every night, which I do. But the day before a big training session or a game, I won't look at my sleep till after because I don't want to know if I've had a bad sleep. I'm just going to tell myself I've had a great sleep and I'm ready to go. Whereas some guys, they're able to nap the day of the game if they have had a bad sleep. And yeah, I think it does fall in. I think it's very individualized. Some guys, you know, they'll get a kick up the hole if sorry, excuse my French, but if their numbers are down, and it'll recreate a positive reaction. Whereas other guys, you know, you can see them dip their head, and it just might not be the best timing to give them the data. So I think timing is the main point, because I think they have to get the data to learn and to get better, but how you deliver it and when you deliver it is individualized and the most important.
I could not agree more. I mean, we talk a lot about interpersonal skills as practitioners, building the relationship, but also I think that adaptability of knowing your athletes, knowing how to adapt your communication, when to give them feedback, when not to, how to go about doing that is critical. So I completely agree on that. One thing you mentioned as well, you brought up, is about tracking your sleep. And we're seeing now with wearable devices that athletes have more access to other devices and more control perhaps over their data. And again, I get concerned when there are other devices available, and often these devices have questionable precision, and they also try to, like you say, you said about the sleep feedback, and I like your approach of not looking at it yourself. They also try to package up a complex construct like recovery into a single number. And I've hated the times when athletes have come in and told me, oh, I'm only 37% recovered today according to my watch. But of course, we also can't overstep the mark by saying you can't wear that, you know, don't wear that, don't do this. So how would you suggest from your perspective that we as practitioners go about that situation?
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm not a major fan of Whoop. For example, I don't mean to single them out, but I just think it's too subjective. I think I've been involved in engineering and professional sports long enough now to I just feel I like something a little bit more objective. I wear my Apple Watch mainly for the time, to give me my golf numbers as well. But I don't read too much into it. At the end of the day, it's about how I feel. So that's at the end of the day, the biggest thing for me, how I actually feel. I will track my sleep, but it's just to kind of see that certain things help me a little bit than others. My resting heart rate as well, my HRV. But I don't look into them too much, because I know I can be a victim of, you know, looking too much into the data. But yeah, I prefer a more objective measure. So things like even how I feel, and then also, you know, if my numbers are good, if I'm jumping high, if my reactive strength numbers are good, if my speeds are good, and I'm covering more distances, that's when I know I'm ready to perform. So yeah, I'm more objective in that kind of way, but I do see how to I try and marry the two of them in a positive way.
Yeah, I mean, imagine using a watch to tell the time. That's a bit of a novelty nowadays, isn't it? No, I think you're right. But obviously, if a practitioner was to come up to you and say, you know, you shouldn't be wearing that, that would probably not get a good reaction. So have there been any negative experiences that you can share with us about just general, you know, data collection or times when you've been frustrated by the testing or the data from your perspective?
Well, I think the biggest thing for me, particularly when I was younger, was you're doing things like monitoring in the morning. I seen on your presentation, I do every single one of them things we do nearly daily. So things like you know, your wellness scores, you're doing your hamstring flexibility, your dorsiflexion, your ankles, your groin squeeze, all them things, and you're giving a score and you're giving your RPEs. But the biggest thing for me was not knowing what they were used for. So I think now I'm a bit more older and I have more knowledge, I guess. But I think if I could go back in time, I'd want to be more informed to know why we're giving these numbers, what they're being used for, and that would have got a lot more buy-in from me. You know, a lot of the times I was going through them half asleep, not really giving it much consideration because, you know, at the end of the day, I'm still going to train, I'm still going to play unless there's something seriously wrong with me. So I think now any time data is collected from us, I'm probably the first one to question it. Why are we doing this? But when I think back to some of the best coaches, data scientists we've had, they're the ones who inform us. Things like when we're in the gym and we're tracking the velocity of the bar, when we're just told to move the bar, everyone's just trying to move it as quick as possible. But now, for example, our gym coach is telling us to keep us within a certain band because that's training power. If we go above that band, if it's moving too fast, which I would have thought would have been good, is always better to go as fast and as heavy as you can. He's saying you're not training the right area, you're training speeds. So, you know, it's things like that you know, I think you get a lot more buy-in from the athlete, and then you'll see better results over the long term. So that's my experience.
Yeah, I think trying to share and educate on the why and the purpose behind everything. Again, that's why practitioners need to make sure they have a purpose and know why they're collecting what they're collecting in the first place. But then communicating that with the athletes is essential. I think one of the challenges for us is that often we're collecting all that information and it does go into the bucket of discussions, and we pass that information along to the decision makers. And often athletes, the only perhaps outcome that they see that makes them think the data is being used is, you know, substantial changes in training. But sometimes there are smaller tweaks, maybe reps or minutes are changed, perhaps the gym program is adjusted, perhaps recommendations are made by the sports science and sports performance team that the coaches choose for whatever reason. For, you know, I'm sure they have their reasons from a technical and tactical perspective. They may not go with those recommendations. So I think one of the challenges we have is that we are using that data and we are making recommendations based on it, but it doesn't always translate to big outcomes that the athletes can kind of see. Does that make sense?
That makes complete sense. And I think if that was explained by yourself back when I was a little bit younger, you know, it would have got a lot more buy-in from me, and I think a lot more of my teammates as well. And I think as well it goes two ways then, because I think the data is skewed. If people are, I know guys who they thought they just wanted to enter the same numbers each day because that's what, you know, they thought, like, I'll just keep doing that, keep my head down. Whereas obviously that's going to skew the data. Now I know there is subtle changes being made, and that's the thing. I think we'd only be aware of it if it's a drastic change. You're pulled from training from that day, which does happen every now and again. But yeah, I just think being informed, you get a lot more buy-in, and you get more accurate data back, and it works both ways. So yeah.
Yeah, and I've definitely experienced the you know, when an athlete maybe is trying to keep you on your toes and check that someone's actually reading the data. So perhaps, you know, they suddenly put all ones and all bad stuff on the wellness, but it's quite reassuring then when they get asked by 5 or 10 different members of staff, is everything okay because of their wellness. So I think that almost demonstrates that we are closing the loop on communicating the data. for obviously, as we said, you're engaged and interested in technology and sport and data. And as you've alluded to, some of your teammates perhaps aren't quite as engaged, some of them. Again, what advice would you have in terms of dealing with the whole spectrum of interest and engagement within a squad of players for practitioners?
Yeah, I think, maybe potentially myself and a few others are a bit more nerdy and like their tech a little bit more, or their numbers and the data a little bit more. But at the end of the day, I think when you get to this environment, everyone's a professional athlete, everyone wants to be their best, and we're all in high performing environments at that level. So, and I think the one thing that is common to everyone is that we're all competitors and we all want to compete. So I think that's how I go about doing it, just explaining that it's for you to get better, it's for you to improve as an athlete and to be your best. And if you do have to go that other level, throughout the year and throughout preseason, for example, we're always competing against each other, whether that's in the gym, it's in fitness tests. So keeping it something like that, keeping it fun, keeping it competitive, and I think that really gets the best from everyone. So yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right that often they're a tool for increasing competition, right? And not always the case that more is better, as you demonstrated with the VBT, but often leaderboards can help reinforce that culture of competition and motivation. Are there any tests that you're always coming out on top of on the leaderboards?
Oh, I think I'm probably, I like to be steady Eddie around there. I'm trying to think. I like my cleans in the back, so I'd probably be a bigger back. So maybe my strength scores are pretty good in that, bench, cleans, things like that. But that's definitely not the fittest anyway. But no, yeah, strength I'd say probably my bench press, my squat, and cleans. I'm up there thereabouts.
And thinking ahead in terms of the future, obviously we're seeing, technology is constantly evolving. Is there any kind of tech or data that isn't really available to you right now that you'd like to see? I mean, that's quite putting you on the spot a little bit there, but
I would like to see a more accurate sleep tracker. I've worn a Fitbit before. I have an Apple Watch now. With the Apple Watch, there's probably 10 or more different sleep tracking apps. Whoop as well. I've my mate has worn a Whoop with an Apple Watch and a Fitbit, and each of them are given different. The breakdown of the sleep cycles. They're also given different sleep times, when you fall asleep, when you wake up. So yeah, I'd probably like to see my sleep in a bit more detail, from deep sleep to REM sleep, and just get a bit more of a feel of if I'm getting more deep sleep, how I feel the next day, because I definitely know I've tried I try to do my best with recovery, and sleep, everyone knows, is one of the biggest players in that game. So I'd like to see a more accurate sleep tracker rather than having electrodes connected to your brain.
Yeah.
That would probably be the biggest thing for me. And then on the flip side of that, I think probably, I wouldn't like to see too much knowledge being available, particularly if I was younger. I think your coaches are going to have to be careful with that, what they make available to younger players, because I know, talking with a few teammates, I hope you wouldn't mind me saying, but Gary Ringrose would wear a Whoop, and at the end of the day, if it tells him his recovery's in the red or his strain is high, he still has to go out and put on the jersey and play to the best of his ability. So things like that, I think your coaches are going to have to be careful of what they make available to the players, especially at a young age.
Yeah, I think that's a big challenge that we have coming. That's probably here, actually, like we said, because also there's so many devices available. and athletes, just like any one of us, have the right to go out and wear what they want. So again, it does come back to that education piece. And I agree with you on the sleep. I think as well, technology that can help people sleep will be of great benefit, but actually, actually help with the quality of sleep. As we know, while sleep pills are very widely used, they don't actually replicate the same depth and quality of sleep. So I think that's a massive area. And then as well, some of the cognitive stuff and the virtual reality options, I think that we're seeing in the future, when you're coming through rehab, if you can be on the field, still seeing those kinds of movements, I think that could be potentially a big avenue. So I know we're in a minute here going to go to Q&A, and I want to leave some time for any questions that have come in. I'm sure they're all for you, Adam. So we'll keep you in the spotlight, I think. But I think there's been some really great takeaways there. But I guess in summary, like, what would your advice be from an athlete's perspective to sports science practitioners who are collecting data in the applied environment with their athletes?
The biggest advice I would give is just to take the time to inform the athletes of why you're collecting the data and what it's going to do for them. I think, like I alluded to earlier, the best coaches I can think of is, and we still do it in Leinster now today, pre-gym sessions, we'll have a quick 2-minute brief presentation, and we'll know why we're lifting within these certain brackets or these certain weights. And then I think you just get a lot more buy-in. So I think to condense that is just to inform the athletes would be my biggest point.
Yeah, I agree. And again, we have spent most of the time talking about interpersonal skills, right? The communication, the relationships, and we just cannot hit that point hard enough. Yes, the sports scientists need to have the skills to be able to analyze, store, interpret the data, but actually the communication piece with both the athletes and the key stakeholders is just essential in the applied setting.
Definitely.
So awesome. Okay, Dara, over to you.
I don't want it to come in the middle. This is so brilliant. So it was. I definitely think we should just make this a monthly session where you guys chat about it, because it's just so interesting and so exciting and so great to hear it from 2 different perspectives as well, which are great. Just a couple of things, like, first of all, you can pop any questions that you may have into the chat there, and I can put them to the guys here as well. Just while maybe people are typing up there, I have lots of questions that kind of came out of that, and one of the ones that I kind of would be very interested in is, there's a lot of talk about all the different metrics that were assessed, and obviously one that came up there was sleep, and sleep is obviously something that happens outside of what you would consider the work, inverted commas, if you could ever consider anything work environment for professional athletes. So it doesn't happen in the gym, it doesn't happen on the pitch. I'm just curious, firstly from Adam, from your perspective, about how happy you are sharing that type of data with scientists around that environment with it. And then from Joe as well, how do you then take that information and process it with what's going on? Because obviously you can imagine in GAA environments where people have full working days with it as well, all of that's going to impact sleep and recovery, or any of the other metrics with it. And even in professional environments, there are things that can happen, such as golf matches, or holidays to Spain, or anything like that can obviously impact on all of that. So yeah, from the athlete perspective, how comfortable are you sharing that type of data? And then from Joe, how do you distill that data down as to being meaningful, and what do you take from that, I guess?
Yeah, that's funny enough you mentioned that, because a few of us were talking recently that if Whoop was made something that you had to wear. I know guys have been in it. I don't have a Whoop, but I know you can be in a kind of a group together, and you can basically see when guys, you can see their numbers, basically sleep and things like that, but you can basically tell from their sleep and recovery if they're on basically drinking or on a night out or not. So I think it's something that's it would be, I don't know, I think in a professional setup, I think if that's your job, you know, potentially that's you know what you've signed up to do. And if you want to be a professional athlete, I would buy into it, and you know, I would like an expert in that range then to analyze my sleep and kind of track my performance based on that, because they hopefully know more than I do. But I think outside of the professional setup, I think it's pretty invasive.
Yeah, I think I would add that quite often the other 22 hours gets talked about, right? Because there's the 2 hours on the field of training that we spend so long agonizing over trying to control. But actually how much everything else is influencing that, it is huge. And that is out of our control as practitioners. To some degree, it's out of the control of the athletes, you know, particularly those with young children, perhaps. Then how their sleep is affected is due to family issues rather than perhaps being in the club. And so I think, you know, ongoing education is so important, and ongoing conversations around those topics. You don't necessarily need to have control over the data. Empower the athletes, give them the education and the information, and then let them look at their data. And if they want to involve you in that process, then great. But also, you know, don't take for granted the knowledge that they have, and that you can still help them without maybe having access to that data. And I do think that there's going to be some complexity on the horizon with athletes and who controls the data. And I think even last month there was a story in the news along those lines. So we are not going to hold a monopoly over the athletes' data, and nor should we. But again, engaging with them and educating them it is essential.
Makes a lot of sense with it. And again, just as a kind of quick follow-up to that with it as well, do you then sometimes maybe you have to distill information in and then provide that obviously to, you know, a manager or a tactical coach with it as well? How do you find that challenge, Joe, about what to provide and maybe what to hold back on, so as to, I guess, you know, work with trust in the athlete and beyond?
Yeah, I think that we have to be transparent with the athlete about who is seeing their data. RPE is another example, whereby perhaps, you know, often the concern is, oh, you're going to show my coach this, and whereas that, or how I use that is I don't give that information to the coaches. But it feeds into this bucket of information that I use then to make recommendations. So yeah, I think to build and to maintain the trust with the athlete, you have to be transparent about how we're using the data and who is specifically seeing it.
So we got a question in from somebody here regarding the difficulties in actually trying to get jobs as a sports scientist in general as well. And it'd be very interesting, maybe, Joe, if you have some advice around that, but also on Adam as well, what you've seen resonate with you, I guess, with good sports scientists and what they're able to display in that environment with it as well.
So my advice is I mean, obviously it's a difficult competitive industry. There is a lot of supply and less demand for roles, a lot of competition for these roles. I think networking is a big piece, and I don't mean that in terms of, you know, just going up to people at conferences that hopefully are starting again now and you know, just to get your name across or cold emailing people, but building a network of genuine connections. The opportunities that I got to work in America came through recommendations. Someone was recruiting, they asked 2 separate individuals, both of whom put me forward. Interestingly, neither of whom I'd worked with day to day, but who I'd met along the way and who obviously valued what I did enough to put me forward for that role. So I think that we are interconnected around the world, and so building that network, building those connections in a genuine manner, you never know what that might lead to in the future.
Adam, I don't know if you have any advice as well about how working with good sports scientists, what are the qualities that you see in them that somebody could develop?
Yeah, I think Joe mentioned it earlier. It's how they engage with the athlete. So things like going back to the sleep example, having that data there, and if they want to engage with them, doing so in a proactive manner. But there's some people who what they do outside of the training block, it doesn't matter, because they produce on the field and when it matters. And sometimes if you try control too much, their performances might drop off. So I think a good or scientist or a coach is someone who engages with you when you need them, isn't trying to force it on you, and they do so and they get the best out of you. And it probably does come back to you have all this data and information available, but their personal skills and how they're able to get the best from the athletes. So yeah.
Just to add on that as well, I'd say that's what employers are looking for when they are interviewing or when they are asking for recommendations. The questions, the interest is more around their interpersonal skills perhaps than their technical skills.
Yeah, I can see that it's not just working in a lab environment, it's communicating that information effectively to the stakeholders in that individual or that team as well. So that makes an awful lot of sense. Just somebody has touched on something you were saying there, Adam, as well, around, I think it's a really nice way of doing it. When data isn't positive, try and help them focus on what's in their control. And despite the fact that things may not be progressing as they wish, that it's still within a control to move in a forward direction with it as well. I don't know if Joe has any tips on that, or Adam, maybe you, because you've obviously been there over the last period of time, people you've worked well with who've been able to I guess, make you understand or to give you that control back in that rehab process or that conditioning process.
Yeah, well, I think every good coach, I've never had any kind of performance appraisal where everything's been 10 out of 10 and perfect. So and if it was, yeah, I'd probably be World Player of the Year every year. So you always have things that aren't gonna be going well and you're gonna have to work on, and particularly in that professional and high performing environment, you're in the top 1%. So it's not like you're building a strength base. I've been doing it for 10 years. So to add 2 kilos to my squat or bench takes a lot. So if on one day my CMJ is down a couple of centimeters, it's analyzing why, and then, yeah, I think having a plan, then sitting down with a plan to try take some positives and make me feel positive that I can get back to where I was or supersede it, which is what I always want to do and get better. So it's kind of looking at the things that need to be worked on or down on that day, and then having a plan to get back and above them.
Somebody's here talking about that they see GPS everywhere at the moment with it. Do you think it's actually beneficial or useful? And if so, how? And I guess that's on both sides. So as a sports scientist, how do you see GPS useful in the different environments you've worked in, Joe? And then Adam, what metrics do you like to see in that? How do you utilize them to improve?
I think it depends is the answer, because it's only useful depending on how it's being applied. It is one type of technology that can be used to measure external load. How is that integrated into your load monitoring system alongside internal load, alongside the athlete response? And then do you have the communication structures in place to feedback that information? In load monitoring systems that I created, it's a piece of the puzzle that would get fed back, where we would look at how did today compare to an athlete's norm for that kind of a day? How does that then fit in with the other data that we're getting from that athlete? How does that fit in with what the athlete is telling us? and how does that, how are they trending over long term? So it's as useful as it is depending on how it's being applied. And then I think like incorporating again the athletes into that. So, you know, in one setting, I would always print the GPS report and have it open on my desk that was in a thoroughfare that players will pop in, certain players will pop in every day to look at their numbers. And that was great because it started a conversation. And maybe that was just looking at their speed or their high speed running. But yeah, it's not the be all and end all, but it's a piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, I think, I think certain metrics are more applicable than others. And there's, the GPS will give you so much, it can give you so much, but it's what you take from it. So I think personally for me, coming back from injury, it was great to try to get certain metrics back to where they were in a controlled setting, and then giving me the confidence to know that I'm back to where I was in them areas. But then I think, like Joe said, you can't take too much from it, because, for example, in a rugby game, 1 week it could be lashing rain and windy, and you'll see completely different numbers to playing maybe down in South Africa on a hard pitch in the sun. So you have to be careful what you take from it. But in controlled environments, I think they can be very good.
Context around any of these metrics is so important, or otherwise you don't get the true understanding of it, I think. This one might be very easy for you, Joe. How would technologies differ between different types of sports, so endurance sports or power sports? But it kind of filters in, I guess, to you've worked in very different sports, in ice hockey, in American football, and in football or soccer, obviously, as well. So would the technologies differ in those, or is it mainly how you would use the data that come from them differ?
I think, yes, the technologies can differ. They can be the same. Again, same with the metrics that you might use. Like you just mentioned, Dara, the context is key. And I'm right. The current blog post, to give you a insight that I'm working on at the moment, is about the importance of translating systems rather than transplanting systems. So there are the scientific principles, such as training load and response. So we may want to always have some form of technology that captures that, so that we can assess the training load plan in relation to, or assess the actual training load and the response compared to what was planned. The technologies we might use to capture that may be different depending on sports, but also even within a sport, you know, for instance, the budget that you have or the time that you have with your athletes, like you mentioned GAA earlier, that might mean that you use different technology rather than the sport itself being the determining factor.
Perfect. And sorry, I shouldn't have said just Joe as well, because I forgot Adam, of course, is a former GAA star as well with Kildare. So have you seen any difference in the two sports and maybe how they utilise data with it?
Well, I know, like, our nutritionist and Brian Cullen would have worked with us in the academy as well, and our nutritionist works between Dublin and Leinster. So no, they use GPS, and I think they follow a very professional setup, as far as I'm aware. I know a few lads who play on the team as well, and I'm always interested to chat to them, and I'm always impressed with how they balance a full-time job on top of basically training like professional athletes. So I think, yeah, they're very professional in their setup.
And for anyone who's interested, they can, I think, still Google Adam Byrne, Kildare GAA, and they'll see Adam playing back for County back in the day. And of course, with all of that, nicely plug for output is hopefully you can see with the different layers of different tests that we've developed in the system, what we've really tried to do is be sport agnostic across that with it. So provide the data across multiple different sports for practitioners like Joe to interpret and then assess as they see fit with it as well. We're running out of time here, but maybe just a couple of quick questions to finish up. So to Adam, with a rise in modern sports training methods, do you find it difficult to work with a traditional coach telling you to power throughout anything, or perhaps a more educated approach of using metrics and analyzing performance? So I guess old school, inverted commas, versus new school, although that's not necessarily always the case. But
I think it's a mixture of both. Again, I don't want to sound like a parrot, but it's that relationship you have. I think as a professional athlete, we're always, we are always trying to give our best, and we are competitive, highly competitive by nature. So it can be frustrating sometimes when you are giving your best and you're at that. You're near that limit. I don't think you're ever at the limit, but you're near it, and a coach is potentially, it's the tone they use, or maybe making you feel crap about yourself. But there's also times when there is, you're not at the limit, you're close, and a good coach is using the data and knows you well as an athlete and how to get that extra % out of you. So I think a basic answer would be an amalgamation of the two.
I think there's definitely crossover between the two. I'm not going to bristle as much as Eddie Jones has bristled at old school versus new school techniques, but I definitely think, and I'm sure Joe, you might have seen some of this as well, it's about talking and communicating with the athlete and integrating and working with them on that process with it. And that may differ from athlete to athlete about what motivates them. I don't know if that's the case with you, Joe, or what you've seen across different sports. The same.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The need to adapt. We mentioned it before, adapt. In American football, you have a squad of 90 athletes. In collegiate American football, you have a squad of 120 at some points in the season. So they are not all going to react the same and be the same kind of personalities.
And then just the final question here, would you have any advice when dealing with female athletes where metrics are likely to vary due to multiple factors throughout the athlete cycle? Is it appropriate or useful to adapt the readiness or well-being surveys to gather this information to better individualize that feedback?
So I've actually just started working with female athletes for the first time, and it's obviously a rapidly evolving area. And we're just starting to scratch the surface in terms of yes, there are many similarities, but also there are differences in physiology. And so there is a need to train women as women. And so I think I don't want to mention another company name, but there is a free app available from a group that are collecting data in terms of the menstrual cycle, and athletes can use it for free and they can log their symptoms. And I think just starting initially, again, with empowering the athletes to try and track it for themselves and be aware. And if they're happy to involve practitioners in that process, I think that is probably the starting point, because it's just a topic that we're really starting to become more aware of in the industry. So I would that would be my starting point, to the tracking and the awareness, and empowering the athletes to try and have that awareness themselves.
And Joe, if you find it a very useful app that really informed your practice, but feel free to say it here as well.
That's the Fitter Woman app by Oracle. There is, I believe you can download it for free, and athletes can track for free on there. So thank you, Dara.
No, another great Irish sports technology
company, yes,
as well.
There you go. So
Perfect. So again, apologies I didn't get through to all the questions. I know some people have been direct messaging me as well with it, but I think it's just showed the interest that was in the conversation with it as well. As I said, just would love to do this almost every month to get you guys chatting about it as well. I found it absolutely fascinating. And I'd just like to say again, thanks so much to Joe and Adam for giving up their time today with it as well. We feel so lucky to have them as part of the Output journey, constantly helping us improve our technology and make elite sports science simple and available to all. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone as well for their time today with it, and look forward to chatting to you all again soon. Thank you.